They say the best survival knife is the one that you have with you. Fortunately, I have my Panacea X Firefly, quite possibly the world's smallest fixed blade survival knife. So I'm going to put this through its paces with some real survival tasks and see how it does. Despite its tiny size, a blade like this could be used for all sorts of different tasks, like cutting a finger-thick piece of hazel, which can then be turned into something like a figure 4 trap, which can help to keep me fed. It really is a tiny knife, but I'm fairly confident that despite that 2-inch blade, I'll be able to cut through this finger-thick piece of hazel here just by using this technique of pulling down, getting a good amount of tension on the wood, and then making an angled cut, about a 45-degree cut into the wood. I would say that worked beautifully. Well, I have to be honest, that really did surprise me. It got through this finger-thick piece of hazel just fine. So now I'm going to be surprising myself even more by using it in the chest lever grip. Now, normally this technique requires quite a big knife because you're using the whole length of the blade. But with a 2-inch blade like this, we need to be realistic about what it can do. But let's see. It's really not bad. 2 cuts. That's really impressive. Okay, so I need to cut this into 3 sections to make a figure 4 trap. So I've made 1 cut here, 1 cut here. So I need to make another cut about here. That really is unbelievably impressive. I didn't expect it to get through there so easily. It's quite hard on the hands because it has a very, very small handle, round in profile, but it still does it. Okay, I'll tidy that up later. So I need to make another cut about here. So I'm just going to make some cuts all the way around so I can snap it where I need to, and then we'll worry about tidying it up later on. Okay, so I found a nice dead log here, another piece of split wood on top. Could use a flat rock just as easily, but this will balance well. So for the purposes of today's exercise, we'll just use this. Now what I need to do is to cut these 3 pieces using the Panacea X Firefly and make a figure 4 deadfall trap. So to begin with, I'll make the upright section. So I just need to flatten off the base here. Now, despite being so small and having a very tiny round handle, you can get quite a good grip. That knurling is really tactile, so you can feel the extra contact you have with that. So I'm just going to flatten this section off here. It may be small, but it is very mighty. This is a beautiful flat ground D2 steel, and it works incredibly well. Very, very bitey, really eats into the wood. Okay, so I've got the flat bottom here, so now I'm going to flatten off one side. It's taken me some getting used to using such a small knife for this task, but it is working. So for a figure 4 trap, we take our upright piece and square off 2 sides. It needs to be quite precise because this will then fit into the sear as part of the trigger mechanism. So I can now make a chisel shaped cut at the top here. think the woodpecker approves. Okay, so there's my upright section. So now I need the angled section. So I'll make another few cuts here. Chisel point at this end. Now that I'm getting used to this, it's actually feeling quite comfortable in my hand. So there's another chisel cut at this end. That looks fine there. Make a little notch in here, which is where the sear goes. This is all part of the contact mechanism for the trigger. The great thing about trapping techniques like this is you can make your traps while you're comfortable sitting around the campfire, and then you can set them and leave them and check them periodically, twice a day ideally. And hopefully something will have come along to make your dinner. So I just need to readjust this because that chisel there is slightly off center. So I need to change that very slightly. When I look down at my hand and I see this tiny little blade, and then I see what it's accomplishing, it does make me snigger. I'd be so happy to have something like this in a real survival situation. It's very capable, and it really, you just forget it's there. It's just attached to your neck until you actually need it. Great design. I've made my upright section. I've made my angled piece. The last part now is just to cut the trigger arm, which is where we can bait and hopefully catch our dinner. So I'll just tidy up the back end of this. Make this into a little bit of a point. Wow, the knots are a challenge. You can really feel that on your hand. But it's done it. Okay, so this is where we can attach our bait, so whatever we might use to try and attract the game into the trap. There we go. A little bit of mental gymnastics going on there. So now I just need to make 2 notches into here. I'll make my first one at this end. 2 thumb technique to make the notches here. I suppose in a real survival situation, anything can be a survival knife. It could be a piece of broken glass or something that you've ground against a concrete block to sharpen it up. But if you have something purpose made like this, it does put you at a real advantage. It's really important when you are making a figure 4 trap that all those angles are precisely lined up with each other. There we go. So my next one is where my finger is here, so I can just make that next cut into here. This one needs to be a little bit longer so it can be adjusted. It's just such a tiny little blade, but it's doing the job beautifully. In reality, this is not taking very much longer with this size blade than even a full-size knife. If anything, it's the only real problem is that it's a bit harder on the hands, but the speed is just the same. Just need to get this nice and flat here. Okay. There we go. So we've got our sear up here. We have our notches here and here. And the whole principle of the figure 4 trap is that the weight of this log will be pushing down on this point, which pushes away at this point and pulls this sear tightly in. Now, any movement in this direction will cause that sear to disengage. And with some luck, the whole thing will come down and catch us some dinner. It's got a nice heavy split log here as our deadfall, and that's on a good solid, well, relatively solid base here, which means that it won't push whatever gets caught into the ground. So that's about the right weight. That will be effective enough to kill something up to about the size of a squirrel. Now, setting this up can be a little bit fiddly, so I'll take my upright section here and I'll just put that there for now. Now I take my cantilever arm, engage that upright sear into there. So I'll just put this a little bit further in. There you go, that looks fine. It can be a bit tricky to get everything balanced well, so sometimes you need some upright sticks just to hold everything in position. And then finally we have the trigger sear, which positions into here. Let's just get the balance of this right. Voila, here we go. Now I'm going to pull this out just a shade so that there's very little contact of this trigger sear with the upright here. And what this means is if I bait the end of the trigger arm here, very little pressure will set it off. I've made a figure 4 trap and I've done quite a bit of cutting, so I think it's probably time I gave the edge a little bit of a touch-up. And to do that, I'll use my Wazoo Gear Viking Whetstone, which I've had for quite a few years. And it's an excellent, very compact little sharpening stone that you can just wear around your neck. You forget it's there, looks very cool. But as an accompaniment to something like this, it's a brilliant way to keep that edge touched up. So this is a true flat grind with a micro bevel. So what I'm going to do is place it flat on the stone like this, and then just bring the edge up just a little bit, just to get to that micro bevel, and then take it off. So each time, very, very light pressure, just to realign the burr at the edge, and hopefully bring this back to shaving sharp. So I'll do about 10 passes each side. You can kind of guess from the sound whether you've got the angle right. We just shouldn't be a grinding sound, it's more like a shp. I've lost count, but I think that's about right. I can't see any obvious burrs on there, so let's see how it does on the hairs of my arm. Yep, that's definitely getting the job done. Back to work. Let's see how well the fire steel works. So it has this integrated ferrocerium rod, that wonderful 90-degree spine, and I've got some lovely dry Millennia grass here as tinder. So let's see how well it works. Here we go. Let's have a look at the technical spec for the Panacea X Firefly mini survival knife. So it comes in a high-vis plastic case which retains it really securely. So even without this Ranger band, it's fairly secure, but once we pull this down, that puts tension on it, and there's no way that's coming out, so it's very, very securely held in there. And the sheath itself comes with 3 feet of 7-strand 550 paracord. So 3 feet is plenty for making a bow drill set or anything of that nature. And if we pull the inner fibers out, that gives us about 21 feet of thinner cordage, which can be used for fishing lines or snares or holding things together. So very useful to have that much cordage on hand. Now the knife itself, once we pull it out of here, is about 4.5 inches in overall length, and the blade length is a shade under 2 inches. And it has a flat ground blade with a micro bevel. The blade thickness is roughly 2.5 mil, and it has this awesome, very, very sharp right angle 90-degree edge at the back, which works really well with the integrated ferrocerium rod, which is stored in the handle. This reminds me a lot of the early Chris Reeves survival knives, which were made in a similar way, machined from a single billet of steel. And this is made from D2 high carbon tooling steel. Now, being a high carbon tooling steel, it will rust, and I've noticed there's a little bit of rust here just from where I've been handling it. So you do need to oil and maintain this knife. It's not a stainless steel. The knurling on the handle here is really tactile. Gives you a lot of good grip. Not the most comfortable position to hold, but it does secure your hand very well. So even if your hands were wet, that wouldn't slip. And according to this spec, this can be used as a file. So if you wanted to maybe file some bone or something down, you could possibly use that knurling on there to that effect. The blade is extremely sharp and quite easy to maintain using something like the Wazoo Viking whetstone. This one came with an alternative Kydex case, which can be worn on your belt using the Alti clip, and all the fixtures and fittings are for it there. So if you didn't want to use this as a neck knife, it can be worn on your belt quite discreetly as well. Another cool feature, if I remove the ferrocerium rod from here, I'm left with this hollow tube, and this can be used as an emergency whistle. It's not often that a knife surprises me, but this tiny Panacea X Firefly designed by Robert Weir has really impressed me. Despite its very minuscule size, it's performed flawlessly on all sorts of different tasks. Now, it was designed to be an emergency survival tool, and I definitely think that if I was in a survival situation, I would be really glad to have this with me. The blade shape is designed, it has this lovely curvature here, this great belly, which is designed for carving the divot in a bow drill set. And the whole thing is machined from a single billet of D2 high carbon steel. Now, being high carbon steel, it will rust. So you can see there's a little bit of rust formed here. So you do need to oil this and look after it, but it will perform when you need it to. All in all, an excellent tool. Highly recommend it. And when I spoke to Robert at Blade Show last year, he was telling me about the philosophy behind this knife. And from an emergency blade perspective, you couldn't go far wrong. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And I'll see you all next time.